Hello again. Another book review in the series on the Rhodesian Bush War. And this book was written by John Cronin, an American who had previously served with the United States Marines in Vietnam as an officer. And he discusses his Vietnam service in detail in the book, but then makes his way to Rhodesia and goes through the process of joining the Rhodesian forces. And out of the units available, he selects the Rhodesian Light Infantry. And he is commissioned into 3 Commando 13 Troop. And the people he meets explain to him the unique language of the RLI, that not only being an American and coming to Southern Africa, and there was already something of a language barrier, but the RLI has their own particular slang and lingo. And I've talked about this in one of the other videos I did. But one of the things that was explained to him, and it made me smile, because on my first ever trip to South Africa, I had to have this explained to me as well. And it's the difference between now, just now, and now. Now, if a South African says now to you, something's going to happen now, it means eventually, sometime in the future. It's a bit like mañana. So just now means soon, and now means immediately. So if someone comes to you and said, we need this to happen now, that means it has to happen immediately. What we would say is now. So one of the things that John Cronin does in the book, where he's posted to 13 Troop, is on Fire Force duties, and he explains the Fire Force concept in very thorough detail. Goes into the history of it, into the equipment of it, and I won't elaborate because we've already covered Counter-Strike from the Sky, which also goes into great detail. Well, the whole book's about Fire Force, but if you haven't read Counter-Strike, then you'll get a lot of information, first-hand information from this book. And one of the things he says, and I'll quote directly, about the Fire Force: each time it deployed, it swept the earth before it clean of living matter. And on some of the big cross-border ops in the late 70s, it killed for days at a time, leaving hundreds upon hundreds of dead guerrillas in its wake. And he was really impressed with the professionalism of the RLI. Another quote, he says, it was not unusual to see 22 or 23-year-old junior NCOs with 4 to 5 years service, over 80 firefights, and 30 to 40 combat jumps. So he's deploying with the RLI. There's a lot of stuff about his off-duty activities, his relationship with his fiancée and so on. But then he goes on to, in October of 78, he decides to give Salute Scouts a try, and signs up for selection and starts training for it, doing runs and climbing ropes and things, because he'd heard that they're very into climbing ropes on the Salute Scout selection course. It turned out to be true. One of the things that they were doing at that time, I've mentioned before that the guys were transported up to the Kariba area, and then at a point some 20 odd kilometers from the eventual training area, they'd be debussed and have to walk the rest of the way, or run with all their kit. And what they'd started to, by the time John Cronin joined, was give a 60-pound wooden crate full of sand for between each 3 men to carry, plus all the rest of the kit, plus weapons. He goes into a lot of detail about Scout selection, a day by day account actually. It's very, very thorough, very, very interesting. He partnered up with Dave Scott Donnellan, old friend of mine, who at the time was a captain. He was 36 years of age, which is an advanced age to do Special Forces selection. Dave had already served in the SAS, Rhodesian SAS. He'd also ran or was running the training group of the Salute Scouts, which was their job was to handle recruits who were coming in and giving them basic military training before they went to selection. And to do that, Dave had not had to go through selection, but he wanted to go operational, being the guy he was, and so he had to go through selection. So him and John Cronin go through selection together. And I previously mentioned the thing that they had to do where they had to go into the water, come out again, and then overnight boil an egg. Well, there was another little task that they had to do called Operation Tea Leaf, where they had to wade and swim into the lake where there were some semi-submerged trees, climb into the crook of a tree and brew a cup of tea, which I think is a marvellous idea, being able to brew tea at any opportunity. Another thing that the staff did was, after one arduous and grueling physical encounter and run, they came back, and the DS had set up a braai and were cooking meat, and the smell of cooking meat in the open is amazing, and it was all laid out, and the guys were invited to come across and help themselves if they took themselves off the course, if they VW'd off the course. So they had to resist that temptation as well, on top of already being deprived of food. So he passes selection, as did Dave, and John Cronin was posted to 2 Group, which was one of the pseudo groups, and he starts operating and doing that. Lots of detail, very, very interesting account of his time in the Scouts. There's one other thing I would mention. He discusses the Americans in Rhodesia, particularly the American personnel who served in the Scouts, of which there were 5 altogether, and 2 were NCOs. One was non-operational. Another one was an NCO who got into trouble and was thrown out for falling asleep. And then there were 3 officers. There was John Murphy, another ex-Marine, who had come from the SAS and had an illustrious career, and went down to South Africa and was joining their special forces when he was tragically killed during freefall training. And there was another chap called John Early, and John Cronin slaughters John Early as being a complete waste of rations. And I won't go into detail. John Early actually wrote quite a bit in things like Soldier of Fortune and bigging himself up. But John Cronin supplies the other side of the story, and it turned out that John Early actually went AWOL and ahead of being a court-martial anyway. So it's all in there. After Rhodesia, he goes off to the Middle East and continues his military career, further adventures. Altogether, it's a terrific book. Sorry, I was just checking the screen there, see if we're still recording. It's a terrific book, really interesting, and particularly with being a view of an American who was in there. There were other Americans who served very well, Bob McKenzie in the SAS and so on. So it was very interesting to get that side of it. And The Bleed, it's called, and it certainly deserved its place in the library.